Buonasera. Buonasera.
Good evening to you all. Thank you for being here and participating in this debate. My name is Silvia Stilli. I'm here representatives of AsVis, Goal 17 of the Agenda 2030. I'm the spokesperson of the National Association of Italian NGOs. Let me first of all thank the meeting and our partners, DEVCO, AX, for having organized this event. When we started talking about the organization of this event was last April, 1 month before European elections. At that time, there was a lot of uncertainty and fear that Europe, at the end of May, and the European Parliament at the end of May, would be based on anti-European feelings. However, and that was not the case, fortunately. And we've seen that the topics loved by all of us, by the civil society, and by the people engaged in social and environmental issues could still play a central role in European policies. Europe has now chosen to invest in the European Parliament and its government, the government that will be launched at the end of the month in order to protect democracy and European institutions. During the electoral campaign in May, Concord Italia and the Forum of the Third Sector urged Italian political parties and European political parties standing in the campaign, and I quote, "Agenda 2030, with its principles and horizons, must be the pillar of all national and European policies. These principles can be translated into the European social pillar, fight against inequalities in all sectors, in the continent and in all countries, the respect for human rights, sustainable development, and the promotion of a participatory approach for the civil society." The third sector, as in the civil society, is clearly interested in monitoring and supporting processes strengthening the social pillar and Agenda 2030 in European and national policies which are consistent, focusing first and foremost on the goals of the agenda. Clearly, the third sector must express its opinion and make proposals because the third sector is now considered as a real engine for growth. Social economy is not peripheral in the overall economic context, but it meets the need for flexibility and innovation under emergency situations. It creates employment, it generates hope in future generations, which combine social and professional commitment. Today, the social economy and the circular economy play the utmost importance, and you can also see that in the cooperation for financial solidarity. This is what we're going to deal with today. Tomorrow we are going to talk about education and global citizenship. We will be talking about what has happened today, about the present, what has happened, and what happened this summer. And we're going to speak about this with different speakers coming from the institutional world and the civil society, both in Europe and worldwide. Talking about ice melting in Greenland or burning forests in the Amazon region or victims in the Mediterranean basin means talking about the contradiction of a development model which needs urgent actions. With a new sustainable sustainable development model, meeting ideas of social justice. Greta Thunberg was important and is still important for young generation. She's been denouncing the situation, but many initiatives have been taken for many years. The EU has launched different initiatives in the African continent, and a very strong partnership has been created with it. And then democracy and development certainly play a central role in Europe and the world at large. Unfortunately, there is a colleague, Mr. Raffaele Salinari, spokesman of CINI, the network of international organizations, has not been able to come today. He was supposed to be one of the speakers, but as he would say, in recent parliamentary debates here in Italy, which is undergoing a government crisis, NGOs dealing with international cooperation and solidarity play a fundamental role and have been mentioned by the senators even during the debate on the Prime Minister's resignation. Italy must meet its urgent needs first and foremost. We no longer want to be at the heart of the debate. We should rather focus on the people who should be helped at home. There's many people who are implementing projects, who are working on projects. Like most of you volunteers in this meeting give a lot of importance, attach a lot of importance to these issues. Let's now give the floor to the different speakers who are here with us today in the panel. We slightly changed the agenda. I first of all want to give the floor to Mrs. Marina Ponti. She was appointed as a director of the UN SDG Action Campaign based in Bonn, Germany. Marina is a friend for many of us. In the year 2000, in Italy, she launched the campaign for the then Millennium Goals. Then Marina continued working on these issues in the United Nations and at UNICEF, where she played different roles, and then she set up Manitese, an NGO. Marina has been acting in this role for many years now, and to her we will ask what has happened in between the Millennium Goals and the Agenda 2030. What is new in the Agenda 2030? What is the current situation? And I give you the floor, Marina. Thank you. It is a real pleasure for me to be here with all the new friends and colleagues to talk about a very important issue, which is particularly significant and topical, both at Italian and at a global level. So you asked me what is the shift between the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. There was a total shift because Millennium Development Goals identified some objectives, goals, and divided the world into parts. On the one end, donor countries. On the other end, developing countries, as in the beneficiaries. So these goals gave different tasks to one or the other. As in, donor countries had to do more in terms of development cooperation, had to provide them more help, more assistance, and had to be more effective. They had to erase the unsustainable debt, and they had to create real opportunities for developing countries to have access to opportunities. Developing countries had mostly to act at a national level by investing in basic infrastructures, education, society, production activities, transparent institutions and governments, which could provide citizens with cultural and economic opportunities to make the country grow. In 2015, there was this shift we mentioned. Hence, the agenda is based on the idea that today's global challenges know no borders. The challenges are common to all countries. We all tackle the same challenges, be it inequalities, climate change, poverty, exclusion, discrimination, racism, exploitation, violence against women, discrimination of all kinds. Now, these are all different challenges affecting all countries. And this is what is profoundly new in this agenda, which has become universal, calling for a reaction by all countries. There's donor countries. Today, we have a representative here, an Italian representative, and donor countries still continue to have responsibilities in international policies. But the main concept is that we're all global citizens. The planet is only one and is at risk. So the Agenda 2030 is now universal, unlike the past. The second new aspect is that a total change is needed in paradigms, in models concerning consumption, production, enterprise business model, the way of consumption, production. So, an integrated approach to all these issues is needed so that the 17 development goals are seen as one. It is no longer possible to tackle just one goal without considering its impacts on other goals. It is totally useless to come up with nice environmental policies without considering trade policies or policies of other kind. So what is the existing situation today? This agenda has been revolutionary, and it very slowly implemented at the beginning. In September, for the first time, the heads of state had to convene to take stock of the existing situation. However, things are not very positive because many initiatives have been taken, but actions are slowly implemented. So, the Secretary General and we as a campaign will launch initiatives in the next decade. As in, we still have the time to implement this agenda, which we absolutely need to meet and achieve in 10 years. So I'm going to stop here.
Perfetto.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. We're going to have some time for a Q&A session, maybe after the first roundtable, and hopefully we will also have enough time to organize an interchange between the speakers. And I'll leave the floor to Professor Giovannini. Professor Giovannini is the epitome of the Alliance for Sustainable Development, when he was one of the promoters, along with the Tor Vergata University and the Unipolis Foundation, led to the creation of the AsVis, involving many local entities, trade unions, professionals associations, working in the non-profit sector. And starting from 2016, AsVis has been organizing the Festival for Sustainable Development. They draft the annual report on the consistency of the Italian policies vis-à-vis the Sustainable Development Goals. Professor Giovannini is a teacher. He was also a Minister of Labor and Social Policies. He was a president. He's the president of the ISTAT, the Italian Statistics Institute, and he has an important post when it comes to the OECD. So he can provide us with lots of food for thought when it comes to data. But I would like to carry out a provocation, well, always on the same point. And it will also be the same provocation for all the other speakers. So a sustainable development when it comes to the environment and society, vis-à-vis the topic of those stating that we should help the poor countries, in the very poor countries, thereby avoiding immigration. I would like to know your opinion vis-à-vis the statement, let's help them in their homes, so in their own countries. Thank you very much. Good evening. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about issues which are rarely read on the papers, but the topics on which our future depends. I don't know whether you're familiar with the topic, but in 2018, the provisional temporary data of the OECD indicates a clear reduction in real terms of aid flows from developed countries to developing countries. A strong reduction on the part of Italy. So Italy, despite the promises made in the past, is reverting the trend. If you have a look at the statistics, referring to the public aid to development, you should always remember that those flows, and I'm not only mentioning Italy, but also the other countries, those flows also refer to expenditure for migrants in the national territories. So this is the so-called inflated aid. I will not dwell on specific topics. However, according to the standards, Italy is getting back when it comes to aid for development. Even though we state, let's help them in their own countries, de facto, we are helping them less than we used to do in the past. And we should remember that Italy, along with other donating countries, committed to reaching 0.7% of the GNP as a flow for development aid. Italy had just reached 0.3%, and so we are lagging far behind the targets we've signed. However, we are lucky enough this evening to have the General Director of the European Commission for this kind of topics, and I would like to carry out a small test referring to the topic, let's help them in their own countries of origin. Please raise your hand. I'm professor, so please raise your hands if you want to answer. If you were the head of the Italian government, or the head of the French government, of the Spanish government, or the head of the Commission, of the European Commission, and if you had a plan for financing research and development, research innovation, based on the money which every European country gives to the European Union's budget. So part of this money is allocated for project. Part is devoted to research and development. So would you behave as Europe does? Europe opens up the possibility to participate in these funds, even to those who are not residing in the European Union. So we may be research centers all over the world, or as almost all the other countries of the world do. Would you restrict the possibility to take part in these research and innovation projects only to those residing in the country? Please raise your hands if you are in favor of opening up the participation to funds, even to non-resident subjects, in order to receive funds for research and development funds. Please raise your hands if you think that since this is European money, it should only be devoted and given to European research centers. This is an example I'm giving you because I want to explain what this kind of statement means. Innovation, we know that innovation is global. And we know that good ideas can be found everywhere in the world. So Objective 17, which is cooperation, partnership, this is a philosophy which in some way has to do with money, not only with money, not only with international cooperation, not only with cooperation within countries. It has to do with a view of the world, with a vision. A vision which, of course, goes towards what Marina said earlier. So this discovery of a partnership which is not from rich countries to poor countries, but it is a partnership involving us all. This is the shift, this is the change we are required. It is a profound change, which must be made consistent with the policies. As I said, Italy, but not only Italy, is lagging behind. I will give you another example. I will do another test with you. As you know, in the last few hours, a part of the Amazon forest is burning. There are wildfires in the Amazonas, and there's a great debate. President Bolsonaro is accusing the NGOs, as usual, because they are weaker. Does the problem refer and concern only Brazil, or is it a problem of the entire world, considering that the Amazonian forest is part of the global system which enables the entire world to breathe? Can we state it's a problem of Brazil, so we have nothing to do with it? We will not deal with it. We're not interested in it. Probably, well, I read just a few hours ago that there is a ship which is a sort of a floating nuclear plant in Russia, which may give rise to accidents. Do we really think it is possible to solve these problems individually? Or rather, don't we think that only thanks to multilateral cooperation will it be possible to tackle all these problems. I know that when I state these things, I am not popular, at least in many countries. There are only two systems. In multilateral cooperation, you reach an agreement, whereas in bilateral cooperation, the strongest wins, and that's it. This is a set of examples I've just given you to make you understand that choosing to cooperate is really different from choosing to compete with others. And this is also the case in economic competition. The development model Silvia Stilli was mentioning earlier is entirely based on competition. Many economists, including some Italian economists of a couple of centuries ago, stated that instead it is cooperation which really makes a difference. But what is needed is the capability to think in these terms. And I will reach to a conclusion with a couple of points more, and one refers to AsVis. A sociologist and economist from Great Britain wrote a book some years ago which is titled Together. The name is Richard Sennett. In this book he explained that the way in which the multinational companies dealing with innovation carried out innovation proved to be short-sighted. I don't know whether you know how it works. Let's assume you are the staff working in a multinational company. That's a team, this is another team, and we have a third team and a fourth team. You compete among you. We launch an idea. You need to compete. For instance, you need to manufacture a glass which is not made of plastic. This is just an example, of course. And each team comes up with the best idea. In the end, let's assume this team wins. All right? So the second team wins. How does it work? The next time, the teams will be shuffled, mixed up, and there will be another competition. This is what economists call the repeated games. This is a theory. While the first time, I'm sure that everybody will have made any effort to cooperate and come out with the best idea, I'm sure that on the second step, when you discover that during the third step, some of the group will become competitors because we will be part of another team, you will not be able or willing to share your information with your would-be enemy. So the conclusion is that the people keep the information for themselves, and this kills innovation in the end. So, as you see, it seems to have a good idea if you make people compete with each other. But if it is badly managed, this kind of choice may turn out to be a suicide for the company. This is the difference between between competition as a tool, not philosophically, and cooperation as a philosophy. And I reached the conclusion of my contribution. The slogan of the festival, you may read it on that big panel there. Let's put hands to our future. So the spot, the claim is linked to the fact there are many hands with different colors, and these hands are get dirty, but they get dirty together. So all these hands work together and they get dirty together. This is the challenge of cooperation. Thinking that alone you will solve a problem is an attitude which is based upon presumption, and you prove to be superb. If you study the goals of the Agenda 2030, which has to do with healthcare, poverty, education, all the various aspects, as Monica Maggioni, the former president of the RAI, of the Italian Broadcasting Corporation last year during the festival, you will discover that it is an extraordinary gift because it is so complex that nobody can think that he or she or a country individually will be able to realize it. Cooperation will be fundamental, otherwise no goals will be met. In a world in which political communication is becoming very, very complex. And complexity seems to be an obstacle which cannot be overcome. This gift is a change, a shift in paradigm. It is a shift in paradigm which embraces the problem of the relationship, the problem of the fires in the Amazonian forest, the problem of migrants, the problem of poverty wherever it is, etc. I know this is a cultural revolution, and this is why each of us is called upon to be a part in this revolution and to generate this change. Unfortunately, we are running late. Italy is lagging behind. But I'm hopeful of the fact that the new president of the European Commission, Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen, with whom I've had a chance to work when I was the Italian Minister of Labour, and she was also Minister of Labour, where she chose Agenda 2030 as the main pillar of all the entire system of the so-called European semester, which will certainly tackle policies related to cooperation. I know it's an enormous task, it's an enormous challenge, but I hope that Italy will play a good role in this global task, in its global challenge concerning us all.
Sì, grazie per gli spunti e li riprenderemo.
Thank you for your remarks. And now the floor is given to Stefano Manservisi. Yeah, the two previous speakers have already provided a lot of food for thought, how a partnership can be set up in a different cultural contexts. And you are the DG DEVCO director, and you work in partnership with Africa. Since 2016, you have started to use different tools. What are the first results you can see in this cooperation, and what will future developments be? Thank you. Good evening to you all. I will start making reference to what has just been said on the extraordinary complexity of sustainable development goals. This complexity has been perfectly described by Professor Giovannini. It urges Europe to make a quantum leap on two sides. On the one end, development cooperation is no longer to be seen as a way to allocate money to fill the gap between the North and South, but rather as a policy which every day must cater for the unsustainable aspects for globalization. Through poverty eradication, through the fight for social inclusion and access to services, these policies has to overcome the obstacles which are no longer the obstacles of third countries, but the obstacles of a model. So the first challenge is to shift from the analysis of complexity to the identification of tools and precise actions so that Europe can become an effective world player. So development cooperation goes from an activity based on fund allocation to an activity where policy making and working together become the most important tools to define what to do, how to do, in order to achieve the goals. Secondly, with reference to the results of the European elections, SDGs and Agenda 2030 urge Europe to really become Europe. As Professor Giovannini said, global cooperation is the only way to achieve these goals. On the other hand, the European Union must become more so in order to achieve the goals. Therefore, the Agenda for Sustainable Development calls for greater European integration. The point is not only to make a correct assessment, but Europeans must also believe in that. We must act more together, starting from being more Europeans. So here, I don't want to talk about ideological views, but Europe is asking Europeans to think that only by acting together, only by promoting a more effective Europe, can we contribute to the achievement of these goals. Thirdly, let's look at the 17 goals. The 17 goals describe the non-sustainability of existing production and consumption patterns. Maybe it is complex, but let's get away from the complex technocracy. These goals talk about the non-sustainability of our consumption and production patterns. If we want to continue working and consuming this way, several planets are needed. Therefore, it is impossible. So this is a European international agenda. So there are clear priorities. Let's get Africa, for example, because it is our neighboring continent and our great partner in fighting against global problems such as climate change, migration, connected to lack of jobs, lack of access to land, and terrorist threats. So what should be done in that context? Some time ago, President Juncker used an expression, the Euro-African Alliance. Alliance means more than partnership. Alliance means identifying goals together and acting together and defining our priorities together. So this is an alliance that should be set up together. This is not just a European project where we have to impose Africans what to do. No, it is urgent to sit down together and identify priorities together. Some of them are quite clear. What is one of the most non-sustainable aspects of production patterns? Youth unemployment. In Africa, 60% of the population is between 15 and 25. Most of them are unemployed. Africa is growing by 4.5% every year, but that is enlarging, increasing the gap between rich and poor. So it is totally useless to provide donations. Together, a model has to be set up for Africa to grow and provide sustainable distribution. So the motto, let's help them at home. This is something I personally don't like, but in any case, this is what is needed. However, that has to be done by not replicating an economy based on the overexploitation of fossil fuels. Only through renewable energy can a growth pattern become sustainable. Inequalities must also be tackled because in the world, very few people own much more than what 2/3 of the world own. Therefore, we need to work together and we need to work transparency. So the law of the fittest today is the most powerful one, and that denies democracy. So Europe aims at working together on a multilateral way in the United Nations and in other international fora. Then it has to work together with other people. According to the latest data by Eurobarometer, Europe is not working together with Africa. So more cooperation and more investments are needed. Therefore, Italy must follow suit. The Agenda 2030 and SDGs are not too far away in the future. When the United Nations were created after the war, the massacres and the divisions, in order to do something to live sustainably, is based on peace, freedom, growth, and solidarity. So, if you read the 17 SDGs, they are a symbol for European culture. They contain the European culture. So only by creating more Europe, only by acting together, only by being aware of our responsibility can we contribute. Not much time is left. The other day, I was reading that in 20 years, the North Pole will almost disappear. And this is taken for granted. Well, if we don't act all together, we will be living in a non-sustainable world, but not far away, distant in the future. So this is the European urgency. The urgency is to create a more effective Europe, create the tools, and create a new solidarity based on the 17 SDGs, based on our roots.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. And I'll leave the floor to Francesco Petrelli, a former president of Oxfam, Italy, and now in charge of external relations of Oxfam Italia, and is a spokesperson of Concord Italia, which is the Italian platform of Concord Europe, which is a European platform of organizations dealing with cooperation and solidarity at international level. In Italy, there are almost 50 entities adhering to Concord Europe, and the debate, I think you will talk about it. It is a topical and real debate, even when it comes to the engagement of European countries. On the topics emerged the central vision of the agenda, a partnership as a shift of the cultural paradigm, Europe, and then on the second roundtable, these topics will be dealt in more detail. Some concerns referring to the concentration of aid only in some countries, such as African countries, more touched upon by the issue of migration. The fear that aid may be linked to the fact of curbing migration, as if we outsourced our borders. There's a problem that of consistency of the policies in Europe, which is part of the debate of the NGOs. I now leave the floor to Francesco Petrelli to provide us with some food for thought. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the meeting organizers as Concord Italia, which is part of the Confederation, including 2,600 NGOs in the 28 countries, because regardless of Brexit, the NGOs of Great Britain will continue to be part of Concord Europe, whatever happens with the Brexit. I'd like to follow up from what Mr. Manservisi said at the time. I think that if there is a merit of the movement, a movement of the very young people, well, Greta is a phenomenon, but there are hundreds of thousands of young people in Italy, and they were among the first participants of the Fridays for Future. But time is not an independent variable. It is not an independent variable for the agenda, which will expire in 11 years and a half. It is not a variable when it comes to our own activities. Yesterday, there was an emblematic piece of news. In the US, the most developed country in the world, the first 60 climate migrants have appeared due to a change in the climate. The inhabitants of a very small community will have to displace. Since somebody is saying that we are now immersed in the presentism, a public debate which only focuses on trivial topics, well, the problem is that of managing to understand how it is possible to provide an answer to time as a factor, because the problems related to the environment or to the goals for sustainable development do not concern our nephews or grandsons. It refers to us and to our sons and daughters. So we need to start from this statement. But we need to change our head. We need to change our mind, first of all. And we need to start considering some aspects in a serious way. The consistency of policies in development and for development, in development and for sustainable development. So in Europe we have PCDS. Well, it is far more than that. What do I mean by consistency? Consistency of policies, which is one of the prerequisites for making progresses at a reasonable speed towards the attainment of all the goals, or at least to make significant progress when it comes to attaining these goals, so that in 2030 we can say that these goals are feasible. This means changing the culture. It means changing the heads of people, because we should start from the very evaluations made by the European Union, the synthesis report. We should start from 3 elements. What do I mean by consistency in policies? It means I measure the environmental, social, economic, and governance impact, social, environmental, and governance-related elements, and these are the pillars of this agenda, and I start to measure them on each choice I make here and now when it comes to my continent, the 28 member states, in terms of all the policies. This evaluation means effects, successes and failures, criticism and self-criticism, and I start to carry out this evaluation regularly as an exercise in which I believe the real involvement of stakeholders, because the other precondition is the localization of agenda. The agenda cannot be put into practice without consistency in policies, and if it is not linked to the territories, we need to have consistencies in policies in the Rimini territory, for instance. So we need to evaluate the impacts, successes, failures, and contradictions, and elsewhere in the world. The extent to which I contribute with every action, not only when it comes to donation, to cooperation and all the rest, to acquiring elements for sustainable development, and last but not least, and this is the spirit of the agenda itself, the intergenerational impact. So what I do today, how will it affect the future generations? The real novelty in the idea of sustainable development since the Blue Track report 31 years ago is in one very simple thing, that I want to live the earth in conditions which are the same ones that existed when I received it from my grandfathers or from my father and from my mother. So the right of people coming after us, the right of future generations, and this is a novelty for policy. This is a novelty for public debate as well. Then a second aspect, and I will draw to a close. Consistency of policies for development, which in Europe means specific things, trade, migration, aid for development, and agriculture. It means that it should be carried out consistently when I make choices at national and European level. If I make choices which are contradictory with the 17th goals, everything will fail. If I don't ask the proper questions, how much do I contribute to the rights of future generations, to resilience, when I implement my policies? And I would like to focus on two areas in particular: commerce, trade, and agriculture, especially having a look at the current policies carried out by the European Union. As for commerce, as for trade, well, this is a complicated issue. So I wonder, do I manage to convince member states to carry out a synergic action, an effective action which changes things, so that it is possible to address European and national stakeholders who are no longer engaged in cooperation in Africa, namely the legal obligation to respect conditions such as dignified work, the environment, etc. How much do I engage? Is it possible for me to strike a balance in my commercial policies which have an impact on national development models and the development models of my neighboring countries, Africa and the Middle East? Is it possible for me to intervene in a balanced way? The other evident topic is food. We have a system which intrinsically produces injustice because it produces waste, an increase after a few years of people with food uncertainty and hunger, and structurally the production, consumption, supply chain and the choices. Think about that 40% of food coming to our house reaches our fridges and then it is thrown away. 40% of this amount is lost between the supermarket, the fridge, the table, and then there is, and then it becomes garbage. It becomes waste. I will now draw to a close because there are many examples which could be given, but in many cases it is difficult to give these examples. There's a big issue which produces unsustainability, namely inequality. That's an important factor. I'm not talking about Africa. My organization is within the G7. So within the G7 countries, there was a small report, a memento, a reminder was launched, in which in Italy, in the UK, the poorest parts of the population, 40%, according to the current trends of growing inequality in countries, the attempt of a young person of the poor income bracket to reach the average bracket runs the risk of taking 5 generations. We're talking about UK, we're talking about Italy. There's a block, an intergeneration blockade. There's a blockade when it comes to the possibilities to have one's own merit recognized and to make progress and to live better than our parents. So the topic of consistency in politics is an essential topic, even though we are convinced that the aid for development is not the solution. But I know very well that without a public aid for development and without the quality of interventions on essential services, healthcare, basic education, access to a minimum quantity of clean water, if there is no public aid to development, which is useful for the improvement of some aspects, no mechanism will be triggered, even though considering growth. Europe for the first time is the donor, but after 6 years we have a minus sign when it comes to aid to development. This is a sign of the risk we are running. The quality of aid for development is also essential. And I would like to close by quoting a proposal made by the World Bank. The impact of aid to development at European and national level, according to what the World Bank proposed, measuring the effect of cooperation to see the extent to which the conditions for income improvement had changed. So being able to make this kind of considerations when it comes to consistency in policies means giving tools and determination, political determination, because the decision makers are confused, and this can enable us to avoid, to prevent a complex problem from becoming an emergency before tomorrow. I now leave the floor to Mr. Luca Mestripiede.
Thank you, Francesco. He is the Deputy Director of Development Cooperation. He was also working at the Italian Representative Office at the UN, and now he is the new Director of the Italian Agency for Development Cooperation. So, as Professor Giovannini said and reiterated later on in 2020, the Italian ratio between the GDP and employment risks being too high. There's a new law that has set up the Italian Agency for Development Cooperation, which has been operating since 2016. My question to you is the following. What is the agency doing in terms of Italy's engagement and to promote the effectiveness of cooperation and to the contribution that Italy can give to development cooperation under the new law of 2017, where partnership and enhancement of all stakeholders are central?
Occasione d'incontro. Prima di risponderti vorrei brevemente partire da una notazione mia personale importante, però. Hai citato che l'agenzia è nata nel 2014. Ebbene, io nel 2014...
The agency was set up in 2014. I'm a diplomat. I was working at the DG for Cooperation and Development, and I was sent to a meeting in New York, but just by chance. There was an open-ended working group. And they knew where they were going, but it was hard to achieve some results. But I was lucky enough in 2014 to deal with something we are all discussing. And this is important for some people doing my job. In 2014, many people in Rome were drawing up the law that later led to the setting up of the Agency for Development Cooperation. And at the time, the Agenda 2030 was already under discussion, but all the negotiations leading to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the 169 targets was the result of debates, discussions, and meetings that were held in spring-summer 2014. I'm now managing an agency dealing with development cooperation, and this is just thanks to that specific experience which I had on that occasion, which made me understand that the Agenda 2030 requires a lot of effort and energy, because this agenda is first and foremost an internal political agenda, as in all the countries have to put the Agenda 2030 at the heart of their own policies, otherwise no results are achieved. In this context, the role of development cooperation is functional to the agenda, which must become the agenda of all of us. We all know that this is not the case because forests are burning. Some countries are behaving unlike the engagements that they have taken, and therefore, soon we have a problem. Clearly, through development cooperation and through our activity, as Professor Manservisi was saying and Giovannini was saying, we need to focus on this agenda, because this agenda puts the person at the heart of any action and enables all of us to live in a just a world where future generations can find opportunities. Now, coming to my current position, it is quite delicate, but it is challenging. I'm humble enough in my work because the Agency for Development Cooperation is the institution representing development cooperation. It is a government agency acting on the inputs of the government. I don't want to make comments on the fact that the ratio between GDP and public aid is decreasing. Hopefully, it will grow again in the future. However, as agency director, the agency will be focusing on partnerships over the next years. Partnership can be seen in many different ways. To me, a partnership means involving all the different players acknowledged by the Italian law, be they institutional players, local authorities, universities, international organizations, the European Union, with which we work in close collaboration, as well as all the entities which traditionally act in the field of development cooperation, such NGOs. And last but not least, the private sector. The private sector is indeed aware of the importance of development cooperation. In recent years, I've read about these American CEOs who have gathered and have focused on sustainability, which to them has to be promoted. This is very interesting because by fully involving the private sector, we will be able to achieve some results, or at least we will get closer to their achievement. So the role of the agency is to promote these forms of partnership. And this is a strategic objective. Then, as stated by Mr. Petrelli, quality is important. Quality and effectiveness of public aid to development. If all countries were virtuous and allocated 0.7% of their budget to international aid, that would still be enough to achieve the goals of Agenda 2030. So the point is that we need to grow public aid to development, but first and foremost, what to do with that and check, monitor that public aid is not wasted. For example, used in situations where it is useless, and be rather used in other situations where it is highly needed. So we should promote an endogenous sustainable development. And these are the areas that our agency should focus on. Okay, thank you very much. We, civil society players, focus a lot on the impact, on the social impact, assessment on social impacts, and impact on the community by the different measures and cooperation. Maybe Italy is lagging behind, but the agency should work on that. Is there any question in the audience? Good evening. Professor Giovannini, I have a remark. You mentioned the term cultural revolution. Today we're talking about Europe and the planet. I think that the cultural revolution has to be tackled at macro and micro level, as in every citizen must be a responsible citizen and is therefore contributing to the pursuit of the goals of Agenda 2030. So how can countries make it possible that each citizen is more aware of the importance he or she has and therefore behaves accordingly?
Buonasera a tutti.
Good evening. I hope you can hear me. Put the microphone very close to your mouth. My name is Michel. I am an Italian and Rwandan citizen. The ambition of cooperation and a new paradigm of sustainable cooperation stems from the awareness of the fact that the community is far more important than the nation. So community comes before it comes first vis-à-vis the nations. One of the outcomes of the globalization is that we are a global village, a global society, a global world, and so all the interconnections and all the ambitions depend on all the subjects. The question is as follows. I would like to know the extent to which the policy for sustainable cooperation can affect positively the awareness of the individuals and the extent to which the individuals can affect can have a say in global policy. Thank you. Are there any other questions? So I would like to invite you tomorrow to participate in another meeting here, Education to Global Citizenship, which has some in-depth elements which refer to your questions. So I now leave the floor to Professor Giovannini. Thank you. Certainly, with no change of individuals, there will never be any sustainability. When Greta Thunberg came to Italy, in her speech to the Senate, she stated, you adults, are you not able to drink from the glasses? Why do you need straws to drink? It may be a trivial question, but one may ask oneself, maybe I can change my consumption style. It's just a little example. If we think that it is enough to close a tap while we are brushing our teeth, hopefully we all do this. If we have not understood this, we have not understood the profoundness of the problems. We need radical transformations. We need advantages, transformations of the entire systems for production. We've talked about the importance of circular economy this morning. According to an ISTAT report published a few weeks ago, there are large companies opting for sustainable development have a productivity which is 15% higher than large companies which do not invest in sustainable development. And so there's a big economic advantage. What can we do to speed up this change? Tomorrow you will talk about education. We have launched, along with Leonardo Becchetti, the idea of Fridays for Future, or better, Fridays for Future is the initiative by students who go on strike. We've launched the idea of Saturdays for Future. Namely, let's assume that a young boy or a young girl, after the protest, they go back home, and their parents ask them, how did it go? And the answer would be, it depends on what you buy tomorrow. Because on Saturday, over half of the Italian families normally do the weekly shopping. So we've launched this idea so that on the 28th of September, after the Friday for Future, we're going to have a Saturday for Future. And we will make an announcement of a set of initiatives. The positive aspect is that there is increasingly more and more attention on the part of the distributors and the producers because there's a change of culture undergoing, styles of consumption. And this is visible in all the demoscopic analysis in Italy too, with an enormous difference between generations. We should never forget that our professors at universities have been educating for years to acquiring more environmental awareness, but this is not enough. And I will conclude, the real topic, the real issue is the demand and the expectations and the pressure towards policymakers. In addition to what we do each day, because we vote with our purse, we vote with our wallets. When we decide what to buy, we should also make a question, and we should push policymakers to go towards this direction. I believe this is one of the topics of the next General Assembly in September, because let's say it, over the last 4 years, the action for mobilizing the civil society was unprecedented, and in some cases it reached the decision makers, whereas in other cases it failed. So we need to strengthen even more our ability to ask for policies moving towards the right direction by recognizing the merit of those moving towards that direction. There's another question from the audience. Mine is not a question, it's a proposal. I'm coming from the previous meeting with Sabino Cassese. Sabino Cassese talked about functional illiterate people, 30 million Italians. It talked about the stupidity, theory of stupidity by Carlo Maria Cipolla. And I took part in the festival in Trento, and President Giovannini talked about the PAAC, the measuring of competencies, of skills, and Italy ranks last. The proposal is as follows. As we carry out blood tests, each Italian should make a measurement and test of the environmental footprint, not only referring to the country, but also referring to each individual European, I would say, not individual Italians. We always place the blame on the policymakers, but we are all part of the mistake in the end. When you are in front of the mirror and you measure your own environmental footprint and your own level of skill, as the way in which I test my cholesterol and my sugar blood levels, my father taught me that you should never waste any breadcrumb. And me and my wife have never wasted food, and I've always used a soap bar. And there were no waste bins when I was a kid. But I see many young people leaving food in the dish. Let's start by making a test of our own environmental footprint, and each European should measure his or her own level of ignorance or, let's say, being part of the crime or being part of the mistake. Some other questions? First of all, I would like to thank you for your contributions, because in this period, sustainability is a much debated topic, but it is not practiced. I am a university professor. I've started to talk about circular economy 30 years ago. And the first master, during the first master course, nobody decided to enroll. But I'm not satisfied, especially when I read Italian Agency for Cooperation to Development, as if we still considered the others to be developing. It's not the case, and I will give you a practical example. It is fashionable to say that revolution needs to start from with a bottom-up approach. I know you can choose with your wallet when you shop, when you do the shopping. But let's have a look at what the Andes Constitution did. They gave a legal value to nature, and they've started a crisis for all the Western legal experts. In order to have rights, you need to be subject of rights. Nature will never ask us to have rights. So what happens? I can become an interpreter of the rights of nature, and therefore, if in our constitution we stated that Italy is based on, rather than work, it is based and founded on integrated sustainability, I could place the blame, I could put the blame on those who manufacture straws, plastic straws. Why is there only one development model? Why do we keep talking about developing countries? A great philosopher said that red is not against black. It is simply different. Why don't we accept a difference in development? We simply need to teach other people, or we must learn from others. Why don't we state Italian Agency for Comparison of Development? This would be the proper name for such an agency. Thank you very much. We will certainly communicate this statement to those who will have a chance or will have the task of reforming the Italian constitution. But we certainly will transmit your statements to the legal experts who hopefully more and more will deal with these topics. So I now leave the floor to those of you who want to add comments on this.
I think that the last speech is absolutely essential, as in we have started to see some legal aspects on sustainability thanks to the Agenda 2030. Therefore, one of the reasons to be a real European Union is to promote multilateralism. Otherwise, as seen in many sectors, there's not only survival of the fittest, but also there's no legality. As in, implementation of the agenda is very difficult, even because this is the first time that legality is considered at international level. As in, the shift in paradigm is fundamental not only for us, but also for partner countries. We need to be consistent at a political level and in policies, and we all need to be responsible. It's like in the countries in the Andes, where they have promoted a very good sustainable development, but they're very fragile in terms of governance. So we need to be much more direct than partner countries. True, responsibility is common. Cooperation means acting together and also recalling responsibilities. Not only numbers may not be sufficient, but they will never be enough if there's no structural reforms in countries where change must become permanent. In short, this agenda is global and is quite complex because not only does it combine all the different entities, but also global governance. These days, the global governance is criticized by many. Then there's a second issue that I want to mention, which is connected to Europe. You started talking about elections. Young people have participated in European elections, and they acknowledge that where we can establish effective actions and establish good policies is just at the European level. It is not just by opening credits that counts. And that must not be influenced by the European Commission and the European system. And credit opening requires participation, where entities are still weak. And then cooperation. Cooperation as we are doing today in terms of implementing projects. Being European means fighting against the fragmentation. We've already talked about impact assessment, but we all know that a very significant percentage of expenditure for cooperation never reaches the beneficiaries because we have 20 different procedures, because each one of us needs to carry on its mission to monitor, because each one of us has to write a report, because each one of us needs to have its own representatives. More Europe means reducing cost fragmentation. Otherwise, money is lost, wasted. Also, we need to talk about the size when talking about Europe. in order to transform models, we have decided to use some aid to development cooperation and to give guarantees on investments in order to achieve sustainable development goals. So an agreement has just been signed with the private sector saying, okay, we provide a guarantee to cover the risks that currently are not covered by the market. We want to use some money of development cooperation in favor of SDGs, as in, if projects are needed to achieve one of the 17 development goals, and we need to do that, a guarantee can be provided on these investments. The relation between guarantee and investment, the ratio between guarantee and investment is 15 times as much. Many investments in Sahel have produced projects which, with 1 million guarantee, have led to a 15 million project. However, that means combining consistent policies, vision, and results. The private sector has been considered as an evil in the past, but not. But now things have changed. Now there is the opportunity to understand that only by acting together can we improve our common situation, and this is the challenge ahead. Reports have been written. You can all find them in a memory stick in your bags. So I'm not going to talk about this. But this is a detail. But we must be clear, this is an enormous political challenge. And this debate is held at a crucial time of our country. Everything starts from the European Union, especially when the newly elected President of the European Commission has talked about a change in paradigm, a shift in paradigm, as in monitoring existing policies to support SDGs. However, without participation, without a different relation with European institutions, this is not possible. Let's not marginalize Italy, because in the European Union there is an enormous opportunity. And this is why this meeting is being held at a very important time. Just one final remark. I really like how the complexity of the agenda has been recalled by many of us. This complexity must be a stimulus for all of us. So change can start from each one of us. But let's not pretend that consuming less plastic or consuming less meat is not sufficient to transform production and consumption patterns, which has to take place at all levels. No, each one has to give its contribution. There's a sign of hope. Despite the slow progress, there's a cross-cutting movement throughout all countries. There's going to be an event, a global event in September. Each one of you can participate, and I'm concluding with one of Lewis's statements, as in, if you are not called upon to write history, you can start engaging now and decide upon its future. And this issue can continue to be discussed in tomorrow's panel. Now, let's talk about the role of Europe. If Europe is now can now behave correctly at these historical times, it can promote European civilization. We are the continent who has created the social welfare, and we can once again become a leading player on condition that we are strongly determined to do so. Because the problem is not only the fact that Europe lags behind, but also it's the fact that brains and cultures have to be reoriented. Let's go beyond inclusive growth. Let's talk about inclusive welfare, fair trade. And I could continue. An enormous effort is needed because the community is a great bridge. So if the agenda is implemented on the territories by involving the communities, or everything will be useless. Communities must not be closed. They don't have to be closer to others. They can be a bridge between the local dimension and the global dimension. And it's up to us, active citizens, to make it possible. Thank you very much for your participation and your proactive participation in this debate. Tomorrow, this debate will continue. We will continue answering these questions. I do remind you that we are guests of the meeting. We are organizers of this event. The organizers of the meeting for the past 40 years have been offering this open space. And let's remember that the donations are key. It doesn't matter how much you donate, it is a gesture of responsibility. You know that during the meeting you have the different desks, Dona Ora, donate now, with the red heart. You can only donate to them. And this is our final message. Thank you, enjoy your evening.